أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا يبلونكم الله بشيء من الصيد تناله أيديكم ورماحكم ليعلم الله من يخافه بالغيب فمن اعتدى بعد ذلك فله عذاب أليم يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تقتلوا الصيد وأنتم حرم ومن قتله منكم متعمدا فجزاء مثل ما قتل من النعم يحكم به ذوى عدل منكم هديا بالغ الكعبة أو كفارة طعام مساكين أو عدل ذلك صياما ليذوق وبال أمره عفى الله عما سلف ومن عاد فينتقم الله منه والله عزيز انتقام أحل لكم صيد البحر وطعامه متاعا لكم وللسيارة وحرم عليكم صيد البر ما دمتم حرما واتقوا الله الذي إليه تحشرون جعل الله كعبة البيت الحرام قياما للناس والشهر الحرام والهدي والقلائد ذلك لتعلموا أن الله يعلم ما في السماوات وما في الأرض وأن الله بكل شيء عليم اعلموا أن الله شديد العقاب وأن الله غفور رحيم ما على الرسول إلا البلاغ والله يعلم ما تبدون وما تكتمون قل لا يستوي الخبيث والطيب ولو أعجبك كثرة الخبيث قل لا يستوي الخبيث والطيب ولو أعجبك كثرة الخبيث فاتقوا الله يا أولي الألباب لعلكم تفلحون يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تسألوا عن أشياء إن تبنى لكم تأسكم وإن تسألوا عنها حين ينزل القرآن تبد لكم أفعل الله عنها والله غفور حليم قد سألها قوم من قبلكم ثم أصبحوا بها كافرين ما جعل الله من بحيرة ولا سائبة ولا وسيلة ولا حام ولكن الذين كفروا يفترون على الله الكاذب وأكثرهم لا يعقلون وإذا قيل لهم تعالوا إلى ما أنزل الله وإلى الرسول قالوا حسبنا ما وجدنا عليه آباءنا أولو كان آباؤهم لا يعلمون شيئا ولا يهتدون يا أيها الذين آمنوا عليكم أنفسكم لا يضركم من ضل إذا اهتديتم إلى الله مرجعكم جميعا فينبئكم بما كنتم تعملون إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. At this time, I'd like to request Brother Taha for recitation of poetry with allow salawat ala Muhammad wa ale Muhammad.
بر محمد وعلى محمد صلوات. قبر عباس پہ زینب یہ صدا دیتی تھی، تو اگر ہوتا تو ایسا نہیں ہوتا غازی. کبھی اسرب تو کبھی سوئے نجف دیکھتے تھے، کبھی تیرے کٹے شانوں کی طرف دیکھتے تھے. شین اکبر کے کلیجے سے نکالی برچھی، تو اگر ہوتا تو ایسا نہیں ہوتا غازی. اور ہو گئی ثانی زہرا بھی ضعیفہ عباس. سانس لیتی ہوں مگر میں نہیں زندہ عباس. تیرے ٹکڑوں کی قسم تیری بہن ٹوٹ گئی، تو اگر ہوتا تو ایسا نہیں ہوتا غازی. اور پیاس میں بھی تجھے آواز دیے جاتے تھے، زیر خنجر بھی تیرا نام لیے جاتے تھے. گردن شاہ پہ جب شور چلاتا تھا چری، تو اگر ہوتا تو ایسا نہیں ہوتا غازی. ہے میرے ہاتھوں کو بھی رسی سے گیا تھا باندھا، میں بھی ہاتھوں کا نہ لے پائی سہارا بھیا. جیسے تو زین سے گرا ویسے میں نہ کیسے گری. ارے تو اگر ہوتا تو ایسا نہیں ہوتا غازی. اور قید خانہ بھی غریبی پہ میری روتا ہے. لاش مستور اٹھائے یہ کہاں ہوتا ہے. فرض بیٹوں کا نبھائی علی کی بیٹی، تو اگر ہوتا تو ایسا نہیں ہوتا غازی. اور کیسے بتلاؤں دربار کا منظر بھیا، کھیلتا تھا سر سرور سے ستمگر بھیا، اور مارتا تھا میرے مظلوم کے ہونٹوں پہ چھڑی۔ تو اگر ہوتا تو ایسا نہیں ہوتا غازی، قبر میں چین سے معصوم کو سونے نہ دیا، وہ ستم ڈھایا گیا، کانپ گئی کرب و بلا، لاش ڈھونڈی گئی نیزوں سے علی اصغر کی۔ تو اگر ہوتا تو ایسا نہیں ہوتا غازی، اور لڑکھڑاتے تھے بہت پاؤں تو گر جاتے تھے، ہو کہاں میرے جواروں کے یہ فرماتے تھے، لاش ملتی نہ تھی بھیا کو علی اکبر کی۔ تو اگر ہوتا تو ایسا نہیں ہوتا غازی۔ بر محمد وآل محمد صلی اللہ علیہ وسلم۔
Jazakallah khair, Brother Taha, for that amazing recitation. Another Allah salawat for him, please. At this time, I'd like to request Brother Zunair for recitation of poetry with Allahu salawat ala Muhammad wa ale Muhammad.
One more loud salawat, please. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajjal farajah. مجھے بھی وطن لے چلو، 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 میں کیسے رہوں گی یہاں پر، یہاں ہے بھلا کون میرا، مجھے بھی وطن لے چلو، مجھے بھی وطن لے چلو، رہا ہو کے گھر جانے والوں، مجھے بھی کہیں پر بٹھا لو، شہیدوں کے سر ہیں جہاں پر، مجھے بھی وہیں پر سلا دو، میں بابا کے سر سے لپٹ کر سفر کاٹ لوں گی یہ سارا، مجھے بھی وطن لے چلو، مجھے بھی وطن ستایا بہت ظالموں نے، بہت خوف آتا ہے مجھ کو تمہیں واسطہ سیدہ کا، مجھے بھی وطن لے چلو، مجھے بھی وطن لے چلو، یہی سوچ کر زیر تربت تڑپتا ہے دکھیا کا لاشا، مجھے شمر کے شہر میں اب ہمیشہ ہی رہنا پڑے گا، دھڑکتا نہیں پھر بھی اماں، یہ دل کانپ جاتا ہے میرا، مجھے بھی وطن لے چلو، مجھے بھی وطن لے چلو، یہ حالت تھی ہر ایک قدم پر مدینے کے رستے میں اکبر، گری تھی جہاں پر سکینہ، تماچے لگے تھے جہاں پر، وہاں خاک سے قیدیوں کو صدائیں یہ آتی تھی ہر جا، مجھے بھی وطن لے چلو، مجھے بھی وطن لے چلو، بر محمد وآل محمد صلوات۔
Jazakallah khair, Brother Zunair, for that amazing recitation. Another last salawat for him, please. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Respected Sheikh, elders, brothers and sisters of faith, Assalamu alaikum. Condolences to the Imam of our time on the tragedy of Karbala and its remembrance of the 40th day. May the Imam of our time be pleased with our cries, lamenting and mourning for his holy grandfather, alayhi salam. Just a few reminders before I request Sheikh Mahdi to ascend the member for tonight. Please note that CFK will be commemorating Arbaeen for the next 3 nights, with programs starting promptly at 6:45 p.m. with recitation of Holy Quran. Programs will conclude with Salat and Tugot Tabarruk. Programs will resume next weekend, September 1st and September 2nd. Please look for more details on WhatsApp. Please note that there is a boys' majlis tomorrow morning at 10:30 a.m. hosted by Scouts 1499 with Sheikh Mahdi Rastani. Tomorrow evening, after the program, there will also be a youth session with Sheikh Mahdi Rastani hosted by the Dallas Youth Group in the lounge upstairs. The age range for this will be 13 to 17-year-old boys and girls. We would also like to remind mothers with young children to utilize the dedicated mother's room for their ease and to minimize disturbances in the main hall during the program. This room also has a live feed and has been set up so our kids can be accompanied by their mothers and get accustomed to listening and sitting in the program in a lighter, less restrictive setting. With this, we hope to bring ease to our programs, attendings, and mothers for these upcoming nights. Just a kind reminder, there is no food or drinks in the main hall aside from water. Please also note that City Cafe will be closed during programs. The Baruch will be distributed in a to-go fashion after Salat. As space becomes more populated, there is an overflow space designated upstairs for both brothers and sisters. Fathers may also use this as a father's room. Jazakallah khair to all those who have donated in these holy nights to the City of Knowledge. Please note that we don't do any active fundraising in between programs. It is therefore requested to all those who can, please help us reach our goal and donate as much as you can. Your participation is crucial to the success of our programs. Please don't forget to register through the link sent ahead and help us with an accurate headcount for Niyaz. By registering, you help us use resources wisely and avoid wastage. If your plans do change, please feel free to update your RSVP via email. Before I request the Sheikh to ascend the member for tonight, I would like to request that we recite a Surah Fatiha for the marhumin of tonight's program sponsors. Let us also include our own marhumin and mominat and those of the Muslim Ummah. As I request the Sheikh to ascend the member for tonight for his speech, a kind and humble request for the brothers and sisters to please move as close to the stage as possible with the loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ale Muhammad.
Before we begin, inshallah, tonight, let's take a moment to recite Surah Al-Fatiha for all of your marhumin and marhumat, especially a couple of family members who passed away from a dear community member, Sayyid Tahir Ali Khan and Sayyid Baqir Ali Khan, the two sons of Sayyid Nazar Ali Khan, with a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wa ajil farajahum. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله الذي لا يبلغ مدحته القائلون ولا يحصي نعماءه العادون ولا يؤدي حقه المجتهدون الذي لا يدركه بعد الهمم ولا يناله غوص الفطن الذي ليس لصفته حد محدود ولا نعت موجود ولا وقت معدود ولا أجل ممدود أما بعد فقد قال الله الحكيم في محكم كتابه الكريم أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم تكاد تميز من الغيظ كلما ألقي فيها فوج سألهم خزنتها ألم يأتكم نذير قالوا بلى قد جاءنا نذير فكذبنا وقلنا ما نزل الله من شيء إن أنتم إلا في ضلال كبير وقالوا لو كنا نسمع أو نعقل ما كنا في أصحاب السعير صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوات اللهم صل على محمد وعلى Muhammad wajjal farajah. For the love of our beloved Prophet and his beloved progeny, a second loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wajjal farajah. For the hastening in the return of our beloved 12th Imam, a third final loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wajjal farajah. First and foremost, my condolences on the Arbaeen of our beloved third Imam, Imam Hussain, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wajjal farajah. The topic that we'll be discussing tonight is a topic that I have received in the form of questions and comments in nearly every single community that I've ever visited. What is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's judgment going to be when it comes to the majority of mankind that does not fall within the scope of Islam? Individuals that we refer to as non-Muslims, which make up the majority of mankind. How is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala going to deal with such an individual? The idea of judgment is pretty clear when it comes to a Muslim. The Quran is full of teachings as it relates to how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will hold a Muslim to account on the day of judgment. We're all familiar with verses of the Quran and ahadith that speak of this idea. But then the question that comes to mind is that the people around me, the majority of them do not believe in this religion. And you start to realize this from a very young age. When you're going to school, your parents might tell you that the food that they have to pack for you has to be halal food. Your friend or your classmate at school, however, seems to be enjoying a lot of haram food. At the same time, he doesn't seem to be a bad person, seems to be quite a wonderful friend and person. But you see the differences between the way you live your life and the way that this person is living his life. When you go to college, it's the same thing. You are told that there are certain gatherings you're not supposed to be a part of. You're not supposed to be experiencing or experimenting with alcohol and drugs. You find there are others who do exactly that. When you move on in life, you will find different lifestyles. The difference and the disparity continues to grow between you and other individuals in society. And the same question that comes to mind is, how is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala going to hold this person to account on the day of judgment? What if this person was never told the truth? What if he was never presented with the reality when it comes to religion? To add to the complexity of this issue, the people who we refer to as non-Muslims, they don't fall within one category. The reality is they fall under a multitude of different categories. There are individuals who are non-Muslims, but they believe in a divine faith. These are individuals we refer to as Ahlul Kitab, the people of the book. A Jewish person, a Christian person, they believe in a divine faith at the end of the day. Then there's another category of people, they don't necessarily believe in any religion. If you were to ask him, what religion do you believe in? He'll tell you, I don't identify with any form of organized faith. But this person, if you ask him if God exists, he'll tell you, yes, I do believe there is a greater power in the world. I do believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does in fact exist. This is a second category. There's a third category of individuals. He will tell you, listen, I'm agnostic. I can't tell you if God exists, nor can I affirm whether God exists or not. Either way, I can't tell you. I won't sit there and say God does exist. I also won't sit there and say God does not, in fact, exist. Third group of agnostics. You have a fourth group, atheists, mushrikeen, and the list goes on and on. So does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala treat all of these individuals exactly the same way or not? And then you add to the complexity of this situation. Because if I sit here tonight and I say a non-Muslim who doesn't necessarily have to pray 5 times a day, doesn't have to fast 30 days or 29 days in the month of Ramadan, who doesn't have to carry out all of these duties, if we sit here and say he has a path towards heaven, and you also have a path towards heaven, many of our children will then ask this question, so why am I Muslim then? What's the point of Islam if at the end of the day, I have a chance to make it in heaven, and this person who's non-Muslim also has a chance to make it into heaven? In the words of some of my own relatives, he actually has a better chance to make it into heaven compared to me, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put all of these rules and regulations in front of me. He told me that I have to pray 5 times a day, I have to fast, I have to stay away from haram food, and the list goes on and on. Therefore, this is a complex topic and a heavy topic that is important for our consideration. And in order to delve into this topic, we'll pose the following questions. Number 1, does the Quran and Islam approve of what we would call today theological pluralism? Meaning, it doesn't matter what faith you carry, as long as you're a good person, on the Day of Judgment, you will be fine. Is this the position of Islam or not? Question number 2, which group of people does the Quran make it 110% clear that they will never come close to entering into heaven? Number 3, those who either do not have the opportunity to hear the truth, or they hear the truth and for whatever reason they're not fully convinced of the truth. How is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala going to judge them on the Day of Judgment? Number 4, did the Ahl Bayt teach a polarized vision, a polarized approach, that when you came across somebody who fully believed in everything you believe in, you would be kind to him and welcoming towards him? And when you came across a person who's not fully in agreement with you, you would push this person away and you would isolate yourself from them? Or did the Ahl Bayt teach a more nuanced approach when it came to how you deal with others who differ with you in belief? And number 5, and finally, if a person who's never presented the truth has a path towards heaven and has a shot at entering heaven, just like I do, hopefully, then what is the difference of being Muslim or being a non-Muslim? Tonight, inshallah, we'll delve into these 5 questions with a loud salawat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Let us begin from here. The Quran is very clear about one thing, and I want to mention this point at the very beginning because this is a common misunderstanding that people make when it comes to this topic. And that is this: Islam does not believe in what we refer to as pluralism. What does that mean? That means it matters to Islam and it matters to the Quran what faith you follow. Far often you will find Muslims, because they want to be compassionate, because they want to be kind, they have good intentions, by the way. They have these good intentions and their approach then becomes, yes, Islam doesn't matter or doesn't care what type of faith system you have. At the end of the day, it boils down to how you treat other human beings. At the end of the day, it boils down to whether you treat other people fairly or not. These basic moral values. This, brothers and sisters, does not mesh with the verses of the Quran. This is a point I need to make crystal clear. Yes? A person who knows the truth, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expects him to follow the true religion. A person who knows the differences between faiths, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expects him to follow the religion of Islam. There is no doubt about this. This is why you find multiple verses of the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala draws a line between a believer and a disbeliever. A believer who knows the truth and a disbeliever who knows the truth are not the same at all. It is becoming very trendy in our communities, especially amongst our younger generation, to move in this direction that, you know what, at the end of the day, none of this stuff matters anyways. Who cares if you believe in one God or 10 gods? What matters is how you treat your fellow citizen, for example, they'll tell you. Yes, how you treat your fellow citizen is also part of the teachings of Islam, no doubt about it. But Islam is a full package, and Islam does not believe in this idea of pluralism, at least as it relates to the person who knows the truth. The Quran has made this very, very clear. Where did the Quran make this clear? In Surah Al-A'raf. In Surah Al-A'raf, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made a declaration. He has made a statement. It is a very heavy statement, but it clarifies for us very clearly that the person who knows the truth about the religion and turns away from it, this person has no way towards heaven. He has no path towards heaven. What did the Quran say? The Quran said, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ كَذَّبُوا بِآيَاتِنَا, the ones who knowingly rejected our signs. وَاسْتَكْبَرُوا عَنْهَا, and when they were rejecting these signs, they had what in their hearts? Kibr. They had arrogance. It's not a matter of he didn't know. He knew. He had arrogance in his heart. Yes, this subcategory the Quran is talking about. وَاسْتَكْبَرُوا عَنْهَا, and he had arrogance. And this arrogance forced him to turn away from the faith. لَا تُفَتَّحُ لَهُمْ أَبْوَابُ السَّمَاءِ, the doors of the heavens never open up upon this person. وَلَا يَدْخُلُونَ الْجَنَّةِ, and he cannot enter into heaven حَتَّى يَلِجَ الْجَمَلُ فِي سَمِّ الْخِيَاطِ, This person cannot enter into heaven unless one day comes where you can break the rules of physics and you can have a camel pass through the eye of a needle. Yes? You know that needle that sometimes your grandmother needs help putting the thread through? Yes? This is the eye of the needle. Yes? The Quran said this person does not enter into heaven unless you have the camel pass through the eye of the needle. In other words, this is impossible. This will never happen. The Quran has made this 110% clear. But our discussion is not as it relates to a person who knows the truth. Of course, a person who knows the truth, it's very easy to cross him out, say you are going to be held accountable based off of your knowledge. Our discussion relates to that individual or those individuals who did not know the truth. This is where the crux of our discussion will begin. Aloud salawat, please. This person who didn't know the truth, and by extension, he doesn't believe in the religion, what is going to happen to him? Before I go into detail as to what Islam has to say on this topic, this is a question, brothers and sisters, every religion out there in the world has to answer. If you're Jewish, you have to answer, what is your stance on non-Jewish people? If you're Christian and you believe Jesus was the Son of God and He came to save you, you also have to answer the question of what is the fate of those who don't believe this. Similarly, if you're Muslim, you also have to answer this question. When you look into Christianity, which is a very broad spectrum, you find nearly 20 different opinions as to what happens to a person who doesn't believe Jesus is God, doesn't believe Jesus is the Son of God. What's going to happen to him? In theology, they call this the issue or the problem of salvation. Is this person going to reach salvation or not? And I'll just mention this point before we get into the discussion. The smaller you make this circle of salvation, brothers and sisters, the more difficult it is to propagate your faith. The more you sit there and say, you know what, if you're not falling in this category, there's no salvation for you, the less appealing your religion becomes to the masses. The broader your group of salvation becomes, the more appealing your religion becomes to the masses. So what does Islam have to do or have to say when it comes to this issue? Those individuals who don't believe in Islam, we have to discuss their situation at two different levels. Number one, will Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hold this person accountable on the day of judgment? Is there a sense of hellfire for this person? Because clearly he didn't pray. Clearly he committed many sins that for you and I would be forbidden. Level number one. Level number two is if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to put this person in hellfire, then how is He going to deal with this person? What is his fate going to be? These are two different levels of the discussion, yes? Starting from the first one, the person who didn't know the truth, what happens to him? Does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hold him accountable on the day of judgment? Definitely. The overwhelming majority of our scholars, if not all of our scholars, will tell you this person is not going to be held accountable on the day of judgment. It doesn't make any sense for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to deprive him. How deprive him? In a multitude of different ways that we will talk about. Deprive him of knowing the truth, and then on the day of judgment, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes and says, well, you should have known. You should have known you were supposed to pray 5 times a day. I didn't know. The message didn't get to me. I didn't get the memo. How is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala going to come and hold this person accountable? No, multiple verses of the Quran tell us. And this is the bare minimum that all of our scholars will agree on. That this person, if he didn't know the truth, he's not going to be held accountable based off of it. Yes? This is what everybody agrees on. Why? Because the verses that we started our lecture with speak about those moments where people enter into hellfire. Yes? And when they are entering into hellfire, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls upon them. The angels call upon them. What are these verses of the Quran? The Quran said, when the hellfire sees the people of hellfire entering it, yes, coming towards them, تَكَادُ تَمَيَّزُ مِنَ الْغَيْثِ. The hellfire, you can feel like it's bursting out of anger. Almost as if it has seen its own people. Before we move forward, inshallah, if we can recite a salawat, and the dear brothers and sisters, please move forward. Aloud salawat, please. One more loud salawat, please. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wa ajil faraj. A third salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wa ajil faraj. The Quran is describing for us those moments where a sinner is now approaching hellfire. Quran says, "Takadu tamayyazu min al-ghayth." The hellfire, it's almost as if it's going to tear itself apart from anger. This is the terminology that the Quran is using to show the wrath of hellfire, especially when it sees someone who is worthy of hellfire. Yes? Takadu tamayyazu min al-ghayth. Okay, you and I would assume the next step is what? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes this person, puts him into hellfire. But there's an important step that happens before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts anybody in hellfire. And this is repeated in multiple verses of the Quran. What is that step? You and I might think this step is not even necessary because this person just went through the day of judgment. Yes, they went through the accounting of their deeds and all of this kind of stuff. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala still has this step in there. Yes, almost to highlight His justice. He said, before we put anybody in there, كُلَّمَا أُلْقِيَ فِيهَا فَوْجٌ سَأَلَهُمْ خَزَنَتُهَا. Before anybody takes this person and puts him in hellfire, the guardians of hellfire ask him a question. Ya Allah, they just went through hisab, day of judgment, you sent a prophet, all of this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, no, this servant of mine, did he do all of this knowingly or not? Did he know exactly where he's headed or not? Sa'alahum khazanatuha. The guardians of hellfire turn to this person. They say, what? Alam ya'tikum nadhir? Before you enter into hellfire, first, go ahead and sign this disclaimer. This is the disclaimer. You can give testimony and testify that you knew this day was coming. You knew someone came and told you that this was going to happen. None of this is a surprise to you. None of this is a situation where I didn't know, I heard something called Islam kind of, vaguely. No. You knew this was going to happen. Alam ya'tikum nadhir? Every single person who enters into hellfire says what? Qalu bala. I knew exactly where I am headed. Nobody ends up in hellfire by surprise. Nobody ends up in hellfire, well, I didn't know this and I didn't know that, and okay, here you go, hellfire. This is not how it works. No, a person who makes his way into hellfire knows where he is headed. Every single one of them say, no, a nadhir came to us. But you know what happened? فَكَذَّبْنَا. We denied him. وَقُلْنَا مَا نَزَّلَ اللَّهُ مِنْ شَيْءٍ. We said, Baba, this stuff is all myths and legends. God didn't reveal anything. What God are you even talking about? إِنْ أَنْتُمْ إِلَّا فِي ضَلَالٍ كَبِيرٍ. You're very misguided. You're very backward. You really believe this man went to the skies 1400 years ago and he received revelation? He knew the truth, but he was mocking the religion. Yes? And then the Quran adds that every single person who enters into hellfire, he says, وَقَالُوا لَوْ كُنَّا نَسْمَعُ أَوْ نَعْقِلُ. Had we listened to the advice that was being given to us, or had we used our intellect, مَا كُنَّا فِي أَصْحَابِ السَّعِيرِ. We would not be in this situation. I know that this is my own doing. Yes, at this point, he becomes worthy of what? Of hellfire. Now, if someone ends up over there, and they ask him, did you receive a messenger? Did a nadhir come to you and tell you this was going to happen? And he says, well, I don't know. I saw these Muslims. Actually, I didn't hear so many good things about them. This is what the media told me. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to hold this person accountable. Hence, there is a concept in the verses of the Quran called al-mustad'afin. Yes? Istid'af, mustad'afin. There is the mustad'afin who are oppressed. Their rights are taken away from them, like Gaza. Yes? And then there are intellectual mustad'afin that the Quran speaks about. A person who is not presented with the truth. And the Quran speaks about them in Suratun Nisa. Why? Because there are people who come on the day of judgment. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells them, why didn't you practice your faith properly? This person turns around and says, guess what? I was living in a part of the world, there were oppressive governments, they didn't let me practice my faith. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells them, okay, why didn't you move? Why don't you choose another place to live? Somewhere where they would give you permission to practice your faith, yes? These people turn around, they say, Ya Allah, we are mustad'afin. We're oppressed. We are the ones who were held back. Don't hold us accountable. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, no, you are not mustad'afin. Because you knew the truth. And you had the ability to go to a place where you could in fact practice your faith. You had the option. You're not mustad'afin. Then the Quran explains there are mustad'afin. This is their definition. Quran says, إِلَّا الْمُسْتَضْعَفِينَ مِنَ الرِّجَالِ وَالنِّسَاءِ وَالْوِلْدَانِ الَّذِينَ لَا يَسْتَطِيعُونَ حِيلَةً. They had no option. وَلَا يَهْتَدُونَ السَّبِيلَ. They couldn't find their way in life. The Quran says, فَأُولَٰئِكَ them عَسَى اللَّهُ أَن يَعْفُوَ عَنْهُمْ. We will be forgiving when it comes to them. So the Quran is saying there are fake mustad'afin. This is the person who could have moved to a place to practice with faith. But on purpose he didn't. Because life was better here, for example. Yes? Then the Quran says there are real mustad'afin. لا يهتدون السبيل. They couldn't find their path in life. It's a real mustad'afin. God is forgiving when it comes to this person. Okay, so couldn't find his path in life. Who falls under that category? There's a lot of different options that fall under that category. First category that falls under this is one, a person who intellectually was not even at a point to believe. A child comes into this world, and then he passes away. Before even the time of bulugh, before even the time of intellectual growth. This falls under this category. A person who is mentally challenged, yes, this person falls under this category. Second category, someone who never even heard about the faith, never even heard about the religion. He also falls under this category, okay? Third, a person who heard about the religion. This one's important because most of the masses fall under this category. A person who heard about the religion, but it wasn't presented to him properly. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, you also forgiven. Yes, he heard about Islam, but what did he see of Islam? What was presented to him of Islam? The most horrific things in the world, media approached him, told him, this is what Islam is. You want this religion? This is what you want? He said, of course not. Yes, I might as well go back to my own Christian, Jewish values. I might as well go back to my own civilization. Didn't want to approach Islam like this. Falls under this category. Fourth person who falls under this category, a person who the religion was presented to, number one. It was presented to him properly, number two. Number three, when he received the message, for whatever reason, it didn't click for him. For whatever reason, he wasn't convinced, even though he was sincere. Are there people like this in the world? Many. There are many people in the world. When you sit with them and you look them in the eyes, he will tell you, I'm searching for the truth. I'm looking for the truth. Sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala fully blesses this person and he finds the truth. Sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may not fully bless this person. Just because somebody is not within the scope of your 1 billion Muslims, 2 billion Muslims, doesn't mean Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't care about this individual all of a sudden. No. The scope of mustad'afin is a very broad scope. And the Ahl Bayt, they never preached this very polarized view, this black and white view. Either you fully agree with us, or if you disagree with us, we don't care about you. This is not what Ahl Bayt taught. It's interesting. Zurara, famous companion of the 5th and 6th Imam, he says, me and my brother, yes, Zurara and Humran, they were both two brothers, very, very close to the 6th Imam. Yes, they had different roles, very close to the 6th Imam. He said, Ana wa Humran, we went and sat with the 6th Imam, Al-Imam al-Sadiq, salawatullahi wa salamu. He says, I came to him, I said, Yabna Rasulullah, I want to present my understanding of your faith. He said, Bismillah, go ahead. He said, our measuring stick is this. When we come across a person who believes in you and the Ahl Bayt, we fully respect them, we are welcoming towards them, so on and so forth. Yes? We associate with them, we socialize with them, all of this. When I come across a person who doesn't fully believe in your message, yani wilaya and so on and so forth, then this is where we set ourselves apart. We keep distance with this person. And the 6th Imam said, Ya Zurara, what you are doing is less complete compared to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala taught us in the Quran. He said, "O Zurara, qawlullahi asdaqa." He said, "I know where you're coming from. You have good intentions, but your approach is partially true. It's not nuanced enough. There's a lot of other details here." So what details are there? He said, "But there are mustad'afin. He doesn't know any better." "Oh, Sheikh," you know how many times I've heard this one, yes? "Sheikh, today is the time of internet. Everybody has heard about Islam." No, this is not how hujjah happens. Everybody has heard about Islam doesn't mean everybody knows the truth about Islam. Some of our own children in our own communities, some of our own adults in our own communities sometimes have questions about Islam. "What are you talking about?" "Yes, Sheikh, there's no place on earth now that satellites cannot access." Okay, so satellites access that place. They have internet or they don't have internet, whatever. They have printing press, whatever the case might be. That means this person knew the truth about Islam? No, far from that. Your neighbor doesn't know the truth about Islam. Either he's never heard it because he's watching a lot of Fox News, or he's heard it but it wasn't convincing to him. The approach of the Ahlul Bayt is far more nuanced than this. So the sixth Imam told Zurara, he said, "Zurara, in this categorization that you did, you had people who fully agree with us, people who don't agree with us. This was your categorization." He said, "You missed out on 6 other groups. One of them is mustad'afi." Then he said, "There's another group, there are people, they're good people, but they have bad deeds. You didn't even take this into account. Then there's Ashabul A'raf. They show on the Day of Judgment they have good and bad." And the Imam mentions almost 6 groups. Says your approach is not nuanced enough. There's a lot of other groups that your approach is not taking into account. Okay, great. So you say, "Sheikh, I understand. God is not going to hold this person accountable." Okay, wonderful. Now what is going to happen to this person? God's not going to put him in hellfire. But so what does happen to him? Because the Quran, by the way, always speaks of the destination of the human being in terms of 2 options. The Quran never says on the Day of Judgment you have 5 options. The Quran always says what? 2 options. Even when it says وَكُنْتُمْ أَزْوَاجًا ثَلَاثَةً, even when it says you're 3 groups on that day, 2 of the groups connect to 1 group basically. Yes? At the end of the day, the Quran says either heaven or hellfire. There's no other option here. So then what happens to this person? This is where the discussion gets more detailed. Aloud salawat, please. The Quran came forward and said, well, these are different individuals. They're not all one category, yes? And we have to see, based off of this, how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to deal with them. Before I go into this, many times there's a verse of the Quran that's brought up. You'll see this a lot on social media as well. People will say, "Sheikh, a person who doesn't believe in Islam, mushrik, he has no path to heaven." You say, why? It says, because the Quran says, "Inna Allah la yaghfiru an yushraka bih." God does not forgive shirk. وَيَغْفِرُ مَا دُونَ ذَلِكَ لِمَنْ يَشَاءُ. But He will forgive potentially anything less than shirk. If you show up there, mushrik, I don't care if you knew the truth, didn't know the truth. The Quran said what? Anything comes with shirk, I will not forgive this person. If he comes with anything less, potentially can be forgiven. It says, look, the Quran is very clear about this, yes? 2 times the Quran mentioned this phrase. If you're mushrik, there's no forgiveness for you on that day. If you come with less wrongdoings, potentially there could be forgiveness. Says Shaykh, there's no verse clearer than this. Well, this verse, that shirk is never forgiven. All of the scholars will tell you, if this person repents while he's alive, is it going to be forgiven or not? It's going to be forgiven. So then the verse is not talking in this totality you're trying to use this verse for. You understand? Yes? The verse is saying, yes, if you show up on that day knowingly with shirk, you knew the truth. Yes, there's no more forgiving for you anymore. But it doesn't apply to a person who doesn't know the truth. And in fact, when you look at the context of those verses of the Quran, they're referring to the early Jews and Christians who knew the truth and they would change the words of revelation. Yes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is 100% clear about this. If you knowingly went down this route, there is no forgiveness for you on the day of judgment. But that's not the group we are referring to. We're referring to a group who did not know the truth. So now what happens to this person? When you go through verses of Quran and you go through hadith, you see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He hasn't made it too clear what happens to them. My guess, God is telling you and me not to worry about them too much and to worry about ourselves, because we have to really worry about ourselves more than we worry about others. But nonetheless, at the first stage, a person who is a believer in God, specifically a divine faith, Christian, Jewish, and he didn't know any better, the Quran seems to say what? لَهُمْ أَجْرُهُمْ عِنْدَ رَبِّهِمْ. This person will have his reward and he will be held accountable based on his own faith. What he truly thought between him and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the reality. Now we would say he's wrong, but either way, in his own reality, the Quran said, Nasara, yes, or Al-Yahud, lahum ajruhum inda rabbihim. They will have their reward on the day of judgment. Which also means if they did something they knew was wrong, they will be held accountable to it. So this one is a little bit easier. Moving on to the next category. The person who doesn't identify with any faith. Yes? But at the end of the day, he believes that God exists. Or a person who says, you know what, between you and me, honestly, I researched and I looked into it. I'm not convinced. Maybe he's out there, maybe he's not out there. I don't know. This person, the narrations have different answers for, yes? In one group of narrations, the Ahl Bayt said, this person, leave his affairs in the hands of God. God is kind and He is merciful. He'll treat him in a kind and a merciful way because he didn't know the truth, yes? Another set of category of narrations says what? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will just send him to heaven based off of whatever he did. A third category of narration says what? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will test him before the day of judgment. See, many of us, we go through our tests here, yes? This narration indicates what? This person comes to the day of judgment. Before the day of judgment is about to begin, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a smaller test for this person, yes? Specifically for this group of individual. Other people have already gone through their tests. So the narration says, for example, there's a small fire that's put together. They are told to pass through this fire. It's difficult. You won't do it if you don't believe in God and so on and so forth. If they pass through, this is their test. If they don't pass through, they have failed their test. Could be. These are details we're not sure about, yes? At the end of the day, it seems like this person, what? Also has a path towards heaven. Now let us answer that most fundamental question that comes up. Because when we get too merciful to non-Muslims, then the Muslims get upset. I've never understood this, by the way, yes? I've never understood. I discussed this topic once, and a brother came to me afterwards. He said, Sheikh, you're too merciful. I said, first of all, it's not me. Second of all, why is that a problem? Why are you so upset that Islam's scope, when it comes to someone who doesn't know the truth, is so welcoming? Why does this bother you? That's a bigger issue, yes? Nonetheless, someone comes and says, but Sheikh, so these guys can make it into heaven too? And I have to, forgive me, Annie, I have to slave away at doing all these duties. I have to pray 5 times a day. I have to fast. I have to observe dress code. There's a bunch of things I can't watch. There's a bunch of gatherings I can't attend. I have to do all of this. And then at the end of all of this, you're saying he has a shot at heaven, I have a shot at heaven too? It almost seems like it's unfair. Yes, there is one important detail that you're missing in all of this. And that is that heaven and this heaven are not necessarily the same. Yes, this is why when you look at the narrations, they have a very beautiful terminology. What is that terminology? The Imam told his companions, this person, the ones who didn't know the truth, they also have a shot at entering into heaven. وَلَا يَنَالُونَ, but they don't reach مَنَازِلَ الْأَبْرَارِ. They don't reach the levels of the one who's gone through more tests and more difficulties. Your heaven and that person's heaven is not necessarily the same. So you say, okay, so the status of one's heaven, the greatness of one's heaven, how is it determined? The difficulty that you go through, the pain that you go through, the ups and downs that you have to go through. If you end up in heaven and a person born in Gaza ends up in heaven. You think his heaven and your heaven is going to be the same? No, his heaven is going to be a different heaven than yours. Hence why we find in the narrations they say the levels of heaven more than you can count. Because the spiritual status of people is more than you can count. This person who ends up, we say he also has a shot to get into heaven. Yes, he can get into heaven too. Is it necessarily at the same value as someone like you who went through more difficulty? No. Could be at a lower level. Could be a different version of heaven. Heaven is one word we say. It has millions of versions. Which version of heaven you end up with has to do with how much difficulty you went through in this world. How many tests, how many trials and calamities you went through. Yes? And at the end of the day, this non-Muslim, there is basic moral values that he knows he has to live by. He doesn't know he has to pray 5 times a day. He knows he doesn't have to fast. But there are basic moral values that he will be held accountable to. If he comes into a democratic natural convention, a party that's been pushing genocide for how many months now? And then he comes forward and they're clapping for the people who enabled the genocide. Yes, this person will be held accountable for this. If he has any idea what he's doing, he's going to be held accountable for it. There are still basic moral values that he has to abide by. Yes, God isn't going to ask him, why didn't you pray 5 times a day? God will ask us that question. But God will ask him, when you saw children losing limbs and organs, why did you cheer this on? God is going to hold him accountable. These are basic moral values that every single human being understands. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hold him accountable. You know where we saw this, brothers and sisters? You see this when the caravan of Imam Hussain went to Sham. Yes? Because when the caravan went to Sham, what happened? There were people who were being exposed to the family of the Ahl Bayt, maybe for the first time. The Ahl Bayt, they were not based in Sham, Syria, Lebanon, those areas. They were more towards the east, yes? They were in Iraq or Arabia, Medina, Kufa, these places, yes? So when they went to Sham, they came across people who have now either never heard of the Ahl Bayt or are hearing about them for the first time. And then you saw in history, there were some of them who stood up for basic moral values. This is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala judges this person. That is why when the Mal'un Yazid came and he put together his gathering in the palace and he was showing off his power to everybody. Yes? And they brought, yes, the head of Imam al-Hussain and the captives and so on and so forth. They say there was a Jewish scholar there. And he began to ask around. He said, who are these captives? And who is this person that you have killed? They said, he is Hussain. Hussain the son of who? Of Ali. Hussain the son of Ali, son of who? Son, daughter of the prophets. This is the grandson of your prophets. So the Jewish scholar stood there. He said, woe to you. If Musa had a grandson, we would never do this to him. If Musa had a grandson, we would never treat him like this. Basic moral values, yes? He's not Muslim, but he knows between him and his God, what is happening is wrong. You saw this with the issue of Gaza. Yes, a non-Muslim who doesn't know the truth, does he have a path to heaven the same way you and I have a path to heaven? Yes. But 2 points. First of all, basic moral values still hold accountable. Number 2, depending on the difficulty that he went through, his heaven is going to be an amazing heaven, or it might be a little less amazing, or a little less amazing. I mean, you'll forgive me, I'm calling heaven less amazing, yes? But you understand the point. Different levels of heaven, because spirituality and your reward on the Day of Judgment directly tied to the difficulty you went through in this world, yes? And where did we see this? In the most beautiful of ways, on the 10th of Muharram. What happened on the 10th of Muharram? This narration from the 4th Imam. He describes for us those moments where Imam al-Hussain was going through the final moments of the 10th of Muharram. And he said, there were those in the companions of Imam al-Hussain, when they looked around in those moments, the more the difficulties increased, the more heavy things became for them. the more frustrated they became. Yes? Because it's difficulty, it's calamity. But Imam Sajjad says, my father, however, the more the difficulties increased, the calmer he became. The more the difficulties increased, the more light was shining from his face. The calmer his steps and his movements become. Because spirituality is tied to the amount of difficulty that you go through. On the 10th of Muharram, Imam al-Hussain gave up everything. Yes, that means his spirituality went higher than anybody can even imagine. That is why his son says, the more I saw him in those moments, the more light was shining from his face. Because every moment that Imam al-Hussain breathed on the 10th of Muharram with all of those calamities, and he was patient, the more he elevated his status in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the reality is, the masa'ib, they didn't end there. The calamities didn't end there. Now this caravan moves towards the city of Kufa, and from there to the city of Sham. Sallallahu alayka ya Aba Abdullah. Sallallahu alayka ya Ibn Rasulullah. Let us take our hearts, brothers and sisters, to the city of Sham. And the description of the city of Sham that you hear about is a city that was full of joy and happiness. It was a city that was decorated for the caravan of the captives to enter into. If you want to understand the pain of the Ahl Bayt in these moments, yes, just imagine someone who loses a loved one. Those days following that loss, the days following the death of that person, is so heavy for the family, yes? The moment they hear the name of that person, they begin crying. The moment they remember their memories with that person, they begin crying. In those days, everyone rushes to console the pain of that family, of those women, of those children, of those families. But what happened to the caravan of the captives of Karbala? Every city they went to, instead of people consoling their pain, people only added to their pain, yes? They only added more salt to the wounds that the Ahl Bayt were carrying with themselves. And the narrator, Sahl ibn Sa'id, he says, I came to the city of Sham. And when I entered into the city of Sham, I saw the whole city of Sham has been decorated. It's almost as if there's some sort of a celebration happening. There is some sort of a Eid happening. He says, I went around and I began to ask people, is this a special Eid that I don't know about? They said, oh Sahl, no, it's not a special Eid, but the head of Hussain is coming from the plains of Karbala. And with the heads of the shuhada, the captives from these women and children are also coming. This is why Sham is celebrating. Imagine the pain of these women and children when they enter into Sham and everyone is staring at them. And nobody, instead of consoling them, is only adding pain to their wounds. Sahl says, I asked them which gate are they going to enter through. They pointed at one particular gate, and I went to that gate and I stood there. And all of these people had gathered at the gates of Sham, just waiting to have the Ahl Bayt paraded through the city of Sham. These women and children, some of them still looking for Ali al-Akbar, some of them looking for Abu al-Fadl Abbas, some of them looking for Qasim ibn al-Hasan. He says, I was standing there and the women began to enter and the scene was so painful. It was so sad. I thought to myself, I have to do something for this family. I came closer to them and I started to begin with one of these women, Sukaina. And I said, Sukaina, is there anything that I can do for you? I am a follower of your grandfather, the Prophet. Is there anything I can do for you? And she said, you know what, Sahl, go and tell them that if they're parading us through the city, at least tell them to take the heads of the shuhada ahead of us. At least tell them to take these heads so that nobody is staring at these women and children. Sahl says, I did this. And then this caravan came through, and then he says, I saw this one man on a camel without a saddle entering into the city of Sham, and I saw his whole body is full of chains, chains on his hands and chains on his neck. And I looked a little bit closer and I saw this is Ali ibn al-Hussain entering into Sham, weakened by this long travel. He entered into Sham. And then they paraded the family of the Ahlul Bayt. When they came into the palace of Yazid, Yazid stood there with the head of Hussain. And he turned around and told all of his people, this is the group that I was victorious over. Imam as-Sajjad got up and he said, "Oh Yazid, this Muhammad that you speak about, this prophet that you speak about is my grandfather. If he were to see you on this day and see that your women and children are protected and his women and children are disrespected and wounded and massacred, what answer would you give to the Prophet on the day of judgment?" Yes? You know why these women and children were in this situation? Because they had lost the one person who used to defend this caravan. They had lost the one person who used to take care of this caravan. Who was that? That was Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas. That was the alamdar. That was the flag bearer of this caravan. What happened to Abbas? Many of these women and children might be thinking to themselves in these moments, maybe we shouldn't have asked for water on the 10th of Muharram. Maybe we should have just stayed thirsty. At least our uncle Abbas would have been with us on a day like this. On the 10th of Muharram, Abbas made his way towards the tent of Hussain, and then Hussain saw him, and the narration says he began to speak. فَبَكَى الْحُسَيْنُ بُكَاءً شَدِيدًا. Hussain began to cry so heavily, because now he knows the moment Abbas goes, there is no more army for him. There is no more caravan for him. And Abbas turned towards his brother. He said, "My brother, the pain is too much. My heart can't take it anymore. Let me go to the battlefield. Let me do something. I can't sit here and watch Qasim go to the battlefield and watch Ali and Al-Akbar go to the battlefield like this." Hussein told him, "Go and at least bring a little bit of water for these women and children." They say Abbas rode on his horse. He made his way to the water on the other side. He grabbed the water. He began to come back. And then all of a sudden, the arrows from every angle, the arrows from every corner were coming through at Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas. And arrows on every part of his body. But as long as this mashk was in the hands of Abbas, he still had a little bit of hope in his heart, yes? He still had this idea that I would bring water for these women and children, until one of these arrows came and it struck the mashk of Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas. It struck the water of Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas. Imagine what happened to the heart of Abbas when the water began to trickle down in front of him. When the water started to go away in front of him. The maqatil say, فَتَحَيَّرَ الْعَبَّاسِ. Abbas didn't know, does he go back to the tents now, or does he go back to get water? When he was struck on the head and he called out, "Ya akha, adrik akha." Imam al-Hussein ran in the battlefield like never before. And then they say when he came back to the tents, he had a hand on his back. And he said, "Al-an inkasara dhahri." Now my back is broken. وَقَلَّتْ حِيلَتِي. And my patience is done with. There's nothing else Hussein can do now that he's lost Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas. ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. Let us take our hearts to the plains of Karbala along with the millions who are visiting the shrine of our beloved Imam to give our salams. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك عليك مني جميعا سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. Everyone. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. ماتم حسين.
Ya Hussain, 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 Ya Hussain. یہ راز کیا ہے دنیا کے بنانے والے، یہ راز کیا ہے دنیا کے بنانے والے، یہ راز کیا ہے دنیا کے بنانے والے، یہ راز کیا ہے دنیا کے بنانے والے. بے سہارا ہے تیرا، بے سہارا ہے تیرا دین بچانے والے، یہ راز کیا ہے دنیا کے بنانے والے، یہ راز کیا ہے دنیا کے بنانے والے، یہ راز کیا ہے دنیا کے بنانے والے. بے سہارا ہے تیرا، بے سہارا ہے تیرا دین بچانے والے، یہ راز کیا ہے دنیا کے بنانے والے، یہ راز کیا ہے دنیا کے بنانے والے. تھا وہ دربار مگر لوگ وہی تھے نانا، تھا وہ دربار مگر لوگ وہی تھے نانا. تجھ پہ ہزیاں کا جو، تجھ پہ ہزیاں کا جو الزام لگانے والے، یہ راز کیا ہے دنیا کے بنانے والے، یہ راز کیا ہے دنیا کے بنانے والے، یہ راز کیا ہے دنیا کے بنانے والے. تھا وہ دربار مگر لوگ وہی تھے نانا، تھا وہ دربار مگر لوگ وہی تھے نانا. تجھ پہ ہزیاں کا جو، تجھ پہ ہزیاں کا جو الزام لگانے والے، یہ راز کیا ہے دنیا کے بنانے والے، یہ راز کیا ہے دنیا کے بنانے والے، یہ راز کیا ہے دنیا کے بنانے والے. کوفہ اور شام کا دستور نرالا دے
قتل کرتے ہیں وہ، قتل کرتے ہیں وہ مہمان بلانے والے، یہ راز کیا ہے دنیا کے بنانے والے، یہ راز کیا ہے دنیا کے بنانے والے، یہ راز کیا کے بنانے والے، کیوں لرزتی ہے زمین اور اداسی کیوں ہے، کیوں لرزتی ہے زمین اور اداسی کیوں ہے، کون ہے شام کے، کون ہے شام کے بازار میں آنے والے، یہ راز کیا ہے دنیا کے بنانے والے، یہ راز کیا ہے دنیا کے بنانے والے، یہ راز کیا ہے دنیا کے بنانے والے، کیوں لرزتی ہے زمین اور اداسی کیوں ہے، کیوں لرزتی ہے زمین اور اداسی کیوں ہے، کون ہے شام کے، کون ہے شام کے بازار میں آنے والے، یہ راز کیا ہے دنیا کے بنانے والے، یہ راز کیا ہے دنیا کے بنانے والے، یہ راز کیا ہے دنیا کے بنانے والے، ڈر کے ظالم کے تماچوں سے سکینہ نے کہا، ڈر کے ظالم کے تماچوں سے سکینہ نے کہا، اب تو آ جاؤ ہمیں، اب تو آ جاؤ ہمیں پانی پلانے والے، یہ راز کیا ہے دنیا کے بنانے والے، یہ راز کیا ہے دنیا کے بنانے والے، یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین۔
سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله والله أكبر ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. أشهد أن عليا ولي الله. أشهد أن عليا حجة الله. حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل. الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآل محمد.
الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. اللهم صل على محمد وأن عليا حجة الله صلوات الله وسلامه عليه. حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل. قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله. استغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد الله أكبر سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده الله أكبر الله أكبر سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده الله أكبر بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر الله أكبر اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد اللهم ارزقنا توفيق الطاعة وبعد المعصية اللهم عجل لوليك الفرج اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات الله أكبر سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده الله أكبر الله أكبر سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وتقبل شفاعته وارفع درجته بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقوم سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله الله أكبر سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله الله أكبر سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده الله أكبر الله أكبر سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده يا لطيف ارحم عبدك الضعيف الله أكبر بسم الله وبالله الحمد لله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر
إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي
بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إني أسألك موجبات رحمتك وعزائم مغفرتك والنجاة من النار ومن كل بلية وفوزا بالجنة والرضوان في دار السلام وجوار نبيك محمد عليه وآله السلام. اللهم ما بنا من نعمة فمنك، لا إله إلا أنت، أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. صلوات. And a quick English translation of this Taqibat of Maghrib Salat. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful. O Allah, I beseech Thee for the causes of Thy mercy, the rights of Thy pardon, safety from every sin, the benefit from virtue, salvation from hellfire and every calamity, achievement of the paradise and Thy pleasure in the abode of peace, and the proximity of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and his purified progeny, peace be on all of them. O Allah, whatever bounties we have all are from You. There is no God except You. I beseech Thee forgiveness and turn unto Thee. Salawat.
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وأن عليا حجة الله صلوات الله وسلامه عليه حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله استغفر الله ربي وأتوب. يا محسن قد أتاك المسيء أنت المحسن وأنا المسيء وقد أمرت المحسن أن يتجاوز عن المسيء فبحق محمد وآل محمد صل على محمد وآل محمد وتجاوز عن قبيح ما تعلم مني. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم ارزقنا توفيق الطاعة وبعد المعصية. اللهم عجل لوليك الفرج. اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وتقبل شفاعته وارفع درجته بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد. سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله والله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد. سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله والله أكبر. سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله والله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. يا لطيف ارحم عبدك الضعيف. الله أكبر. بسم الله وبالله الحمد لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر.
إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إني أسألك موجبات رحمتك وعزائم مغفرتك والنجاة من النار ومن كل بلية والفوز بالجنة والرضوان في دار السلام وجوار نبيك محمد عليه وآله السلام. اللهم ما بنا من نعمة فمنك، لا إله إلا أنت، أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. صلوات.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك يا رسول الله، السلام عليك يا حبيب الله، السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين علي بن أبي طالب، السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين، السلام عليك يا حسن المجتبى، السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله الحسين، السلام على 9 المعصومين من ذرية الحسين، السلام عليك يا صاحب العصر والزمان، السلام عليك يا خليفة الرحمن، السلام عليك يا إمام الإنس والجان ورحمة الله وبركاته، السلام عليكم يا أهل بيت النبوة جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته.